All right. Good evening, people. We are meeting this evening with Mary Birmingham, who is a curator on the East Coast of the United States. Mary, how are you?
I am well, thank you. Sticky and hot.
Yeah, you guys have had a bunch of rain back there, didn't you? How long have you been a curator?
So I have been a curator of contemporary art since about 2005. Not that long.
And I've got, why is this video not switching to, do you guys, let me unmute Steve. Steve, do you see Mary or do you see somebody else?
I can see Mary, but I can see everybody else as well. I'm in the speaker.
Mary, talk about something. I don't feel like the software is working right. I don't know that there's anything I can do about it.
Wall behind some photographs on it.
Yeah. No, I see you, but I wanted to see you in the whole screen and not just the partial thing. Anyway, Steve, I see. So Mary, let's continue. So where were you raised?
I was raised partially in Massachusetts in the suburbs of Boston and moved to New Jersey as a teenager. And I've basically lived in New Jersey ever since. And I started my career in the 1980s at the Whitney Museum, but I worked more in the collection area.
Hold on, let's go backwards. So I'm curious about when did you first realize you were interested in art, and were you interested in the role in some administrative kind of capacity first, or were you interested in the role as a maker?
I think probably as a child, I was more interested in being a maker. Although I always liked to collect things and arrange things. But I always liked to draw. I think I was always frustrated that I wasn't better at it. And in high school, I did take art as a major. I took art, studio art every day. And I think that once I set foot in a museum for the first time, I was probably age 12, the first time I ever went to a museum. And I still remember, it was the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I still remember walking into that space, feeling like I was in a completely different place. And that's a feeling that has stayed with me throughout my life. Whenever I go into a museum, I feel like I'm at home on some level. So I think it took me a while to realize that I could have a career in museums, but I mean, I was certainly in college age when I came to that realization.
Do you ever wonder about past lives?
Past lives?
Yeah. I mean, you feel so at home in a museum. Why? What, like, were you an Etruscan?
You know, I had really had that feeling for the first time. The first time I went to Italy, I was in my mid-20s, and when I went to Florence, I felt like, wow, this seems familiar on some level. Now, I could have been projecting that, but I think it's more, I always feel like I'm with my tribe when I'm in a museum space.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I'm Irish, and I went to Ireland for the first time about 10 years ago, and kept waiting for that aha moment where I would feel like, oh, I'm with my people. And I was disappointed that I didn't feel that connection to like the Irish soil.
Right.
And I went to a museum in Dublin. I took a day off from family stuff, and I opened the door and stepped inside. And the second I put my foot on the ground, I felt this. Now I feel it. And I realized that my tribe is really the art world, or certainly that part of the art world that elevates art and reveres art, really almost, I don't want to sound sappy, but almost like a religion.
All right, let's get sappy or tacky. What about when you go into a commercial art gallery or an artist's studio?
Oh, well, okay. Spaces. First, let me say, when I go into a commercial gallery, I'm always a little bit intimidated. As are, I think, many people, because you always feel like, unless it's a gallery where I know the people, I feel like, am I intruding? Is this a space that welcomes me? And then I think I'm usually then responding to whatever's on the walls. When I visit an artist's studio, I feel completely privileged and like I'm really in on something exciting. I'm completely stimulated by visiting artists. To me, I love looking at art, and I especially love looking at art with artists.
Okay, let's go backwards again. Where did you go to college?
I graduated from Seton Hall University in New Jersey with a degree in art history. And then I started graduate school at the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU and dropped out in the 80s when I got my first job at the Whitney Museum. And then I had a family and kind of dropped out of the art world for 10 years while I had some children. And then I had to get back into it. So I did it on a local level. And then I went back and completed my master's degree at Hunter College. So I have both degrees are in art history.
Okay. So you left the so-called art world for a decade, which many people have done, and you've reemerged.
Yeah.
Is that a valid experience?
I think it's completely valid, and I think it's the kind of thing that, you know, it's empowering once you realize that it's possible. I think at the time when I left, I felt like I'm never getting back in, and I was in my 30s. So when I think about it now, I think how absurd.
Right.
Absurd that I ever really left, or absurd that I didn't think it would be an easy way back in. But I did find, you know, I had a little bit of a difficulty getting my first curatorial job. I taught college for a couple of years as an adjunct. I taught art history. I did some independent curating, some writing for local newspapers. And I was frustrated, but once I got my first museum curator job, in I guess 2007, I found that then I started to develop relationships with living artists, and I realized in retrospect that was really the way back in. People are I find at least makers in the art world are very welcoming and are anxious to have more people in their network and in their community. And had I known that, I never would have even hesitated. I would have dove right back in.
That's an interesting and good point of view. What about the things you did while you were not actively engaged in the art world? Are those valid in your art experience, in your curation, in your wisdom now? Or are they irrelevant?
Probably irrelevant. You know, I don't think it gave me any additional insight, or it brought anything to the table. I think that whatever skills and baggage I brought into my experience being a stay-at-home mother for 10 years, I think I continue to take those things with me, but they weren't specific to being home with kids. It wasn't my favorite thing to do, I'll be honest with you. I think now, gee, I should have at least done something part-time. But when you're in the middle of it.
Don't you think that, though, it gives you you're more nurturing? You can't say no. You're going to have to agree. Sorry.
Well, no, I should also tell you that I'm the oldest of 10 children, and my mother had 10 children in 12 years. So I grew up surrounded by younger children.
Like a convent.
Pretty much. So, yeah, I mean, I love kids, but I can't actually say it was enough for me at the time.
Okay. I think you are particularly supportive of women.
I think I am, and I can't take any credit for that being an intentional thing. I think it's probably just a byproduct of having a lot of relationships. I tend to know more women. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I never set out to show more women, but I was looking at my statistics earlier today, and I definitely have shown a majority of women, both in group shows and Well, in solo shows, I've been at this job for 6 years, and we've done 38 shows, 10 of them group shows, and 28 of them solo projects. And the solo projects have been pretty much 50-50. The group shows have been dominated by women, I'd say probably 10 to 6, something like that. And it was never intentional. It just, I think, I
had a gallery. I hired a director, and she said, "How come you show only men?" And I went, "What? I don't." And she said, "Look at your roster. It's 2/3 men." And I went, "Oh, well, let's fix that." But I didn't know until it had been pointed out to me.
And I do think when I started working as a curator in New Jersey, I think that at Contemporary, and this is really, I'm an exhibition curator. We don't have a collection at our institution. So I think that my first goal, probably when I was thinking about diversity and balance in the program that I've designed, I think my first order of business was to make sure that I showed enough women. I will cop to that.
Okay, let's talk about diversity and balance for a moment, okay? And let's draw this as a big pie.
Yeah.
What are the ingredients?
So I think balance is a rhythm across the year's schedule that brings different kinds of art made by different kinds of makers to my audience. That's what I think of as balance, that I have older artists, younger artists, edgier stuff. I have a bias toward, personal bias toward abstract art, but I want to make sure that my program is not dominated by that. So I make sure if I have, a geometric abstraction show, that maybe the next show might be a nature-based a show around some theme of nature. So I think that in terms of content and balance, and then once I made sure that I was, ticking all those boxes, I started looking at things like, are we showing enough artists of color? Have we addressed Latino artists? Last year, I was able to work with a Puerto Rican American artist and do a catalog both in Spanish and English, and do a lot of programs in Spanish and English, and we'd never done that before. So I think that now that I feel like we're kind of solidly on, I have a pretty good schedule going forward, I'm able to think about some of these other issues. Lately, I've been thinking more about socially engaged art, something that I really haven't done up until this past year, and I did a couple of shows that I would say fell more in that category, and I'm really interested in that, especially given the state of affairs in the world right now. I think I think we're going to see more and more artists addressing some of these issues in their works.
Oh, right. Are you trying to grow your audience perpetually?
Absolutely. I think that's my biggest challenge. I know a ton of great artists, and I continue to meet artists all the time. I will never run out of great people to show and good ideas. But so that I think that the challenge then becomes to get these people in front of bigger and more diverse audiences. And when I say that, I don't just mean by things like gender or race. I mean, for instance, we do a program with high school kids in an urban high school district near the Visual Arts Center. So we do a lot of, we have a partnership with an arts high school. So that's a different audience than, say, the people who live in Summit, New Jersey, who might come to the Art Center. So trying to broaden our reach and to develop different audiences is definitely very high on my list, and high on the list of the institution. I think also recognition from within the art world is personally a challenge to me. I want to get my shows reviewed more, and I want people paying attention to what we're doing.
Does the vast majority of your funding come from public? I mean, government, like that?
I think the institution is funded, well, we have a studio school that where we have 10 studios, and we service about 3,000 adults and children a year to taking art classes. So that, I mean, that, of course, there are expenses involved with that, but we generate some revenue from that. I think our biggest funders are the state of New Jersey, which, of course, is channeling funds from the NEA. And so our state arts council, local foundations, I have a modest endowment that throws off some income, and a funder, someone who's been funding a private foundation that's been making a significant contribution to the exhibition program for the last 6 years. So we cobble it together. And then we also look for specific funding for individual projects. We were really thrilled to get a grant from the NEA for a project we're doing next spring. So, and the more, of course, the more you do that, the better your track record becomes. You know, I think it's a self-perpetuating.
I have two questions. I hope I can remember them both. One is, how much, are you aware of where the money is coming from when you cogitate about exhibitions?
No, I honestly, I think in this job I've been really very lucky that I have had complete freedom in terms of.
Okay. How much of your time do you think is raising money, spent raising money?
I wouldn't, up to 20%. I mean, more than 10, probably, hopefully not more than 20, but it's a significant amount of time.
Do you, as you ponder exhibitions, do you focus geographically within a 50-mile radius, at 500, the whole planet Earth, solar system, what?
You mean for artists with whom to work?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I tend to, I know a lot of people in New York, so I would say the majority of my artists are coming from New York, but I did a show last year that had about 22 artists in it, and 7 of them were from Holland. I had a connection with someone in Holland. We, and going through galleries, I have an assistant curator, and she did a show this year that had a Chinese artist, and she worked with the artist gallery. So I worked with an Australian artist on a big solo project 2 years ago. So I wouldn't say that. We really do try to draw from all over the globe, right. But having said that, I would say the majority of the artists I work with are from New York.
Where do notions for exhibitions come from?
That's the question everyone asks. I think basically it comes from looking at art. And I think in terms of solo projects, I might meet an artist whose work intrigues me on some level. And I also have to say that I meet a lot of artists, and I love a lot of work, but I always think about the appropriateness of a particular project for my audience. Something really deeply conceptual with a lot of pages of notes and vitrines would really be a difficult show for my audience. So I try to keep, I'm not saying I'm dumbing things down in any sense, but you know, I try to keep in mind curating for a general audience. But in terms of group shows and thematic shows, I would say that something might intrigue me. A few years ago, I had an idea. I really like artists who make art by cutting materials, cutting paper. So, you know, I met an artist, actually, when I was first starting out, I was at a dinner party, you know, after an opening, and I was sitting next to someone I'd never met before, and I said, and this is a question I always tell artists, be prepared to answer this question. I said, what kind of work do you make? And she said, I make ink drawings, gestural drawings, and on paper, and after I'm done making all these gestural lines, I cut away the negative space with an X-Acto knife. And I could picture it the way she described it, and I said, that's really interesting. And I did a studio visit, and I loved the work. And then maybe, you know, a month later, maybe I'd be someplace and I'd see someone else who was using cutting as a technique. So after you see a couple of things, it kind of reinforces an idea. I once did a show all about, I love materials and processes. And I once did a show called Fireworks, and it was work that was made through the process of burning or smoking or.
Let's go back to the cutting thing. I want to use this as a specific thing. When this show happened, how many artists were in the show?
So in the first show, well, that one I did, it had two venues. I did it at the Hunter College Galleries and at the Hunterdon Art Museum, where I was the curator.
In California?
No, in Hunterdon County, New Jersey.
Okay, the other one. Okay, good.
That's a frequent mix-up. So the show was called Cutters, and I think there were 28 artists in the show, and I had it at two venues, and we did one catalog, you know.
Okay, when you conjured up the show and had the title, how many artists were in it? I mean, my assumption is that you had a core group of artists that you knew you wanted, and I've got enough to generate for the genesis of a show. Now I need more. Let's go. Now I got to find more artists. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly it.
How did you find more artists?
That used to be true back in 2006, 2007 when I was first getting started. Back in those days, I used a lot of slide registries. I did a lot of digging online, white columns and artist space, the drawing center. I think now, you know, you don't have to rely on slide registries. There are a lot of other resources online, and I have a much bigger network now. I'm out and about and seeing a lot of art, and I know a lot of people. So I don't rely quite so much on the internet. But when I first started out, that was definitely how I would get started. And then I would do things like, if I liked an artist who was really committed to that idea of cutting, maybe I'd look at their CV and I'd look to see what other shows they had been in.
Right.
And then I'd look up those shows to find artists who they had shown with, because perhaps, you know, it's a recurring theme. So I did that a lot. And then, for instance, that show was called Cutters, and I have worked with some of the artists on solo projects because I kept in contact. So a lot of times group shows that I've organized have then spurred me on to work with artists in a deeper dive.
Let's shift gears. Let's say you're doing a group show and artists could easily be coming. Well, you had artists from Holland, some country with an A, and China. Who pays for shipping? How did the work get there?
So, yeah, that was interesting. The Chinese work came from a gallery in Florida, and we pay for shipping within the United States. I also paid for the shipping from Holland, but I did something that is probably, I'm sure all of the artists in the room will relate to this. I had an artist who I had developed a relationship with in Holland, who has a small gallery in his house, and he offered to aggregate all of the shipping, and he mailed the art to me. The works that came from Europe were mostly works on paper, and I had them framed here.
Yeah.
Or they were packaged by the artist and mailed. And it was not, that's not really the conventional way. And it was a little nerve-wracking for me, because normally I use art shippers. And
you know, creative people can find creative solutions, and artists can, you know, frequently digitize something, and you can print it over here and they can make it over there. And there's a wonderful array of, it's interesting, those kinds of solutions.
Things get in our way, impediments like that. We try to figure it out, you know, and we usually can.
How many exhibits are you doing simultaneously?
So I have 3 gallery spaces, one large space and 2 smaller rooms that would be more like project spaces. And I've been changing out the shows 3 times a year. So I've been doing up to 9 or 10 shows a year. We're going to cut that back next year and keep the shows up for a slightly longer period. Keep the shows up for 4 months, because it gives us more of an opportunity to do some related programming around the shows. And we don't have a lot of foot traffic. We have to really work hard to bring groups in, and this will enable us to be able to plan a little bit more effectively. So hopefully I'll be doing a few less shows.
Right. Hey, you guys, let's open this up for questions momentarily. Raise hands or be prepared to be intelligent. do you look at peer organizations? I mean, I can think of other places that have, brave, that's not, I want a better word, adventure, exhibition agendas, programs, and art education, hands-on youth facilities. Do you look at what others are doing? Do you extrapolate from their brilliance and or mistakes?
I think that I look aspirationally at places like the Aldrich Museum in Connecticut is a museum that I really would like to emulate. And so I think that I'm inspired by, or places like ICA in Boston, or contemporary art spaces. But and I think that I try to do a lot of networking with colleagues. I think it's probably more like commiserating. Oh my God, how are we going to achieve this goal? Or, how do you guys deal with this? I think it's more like that. I don't know if that answers the question. But.
Kind of. I can go back to it some more. I want more questions. Richard's got one. Richard, go ahead. And other people, fire them up. Richard.
No. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Socially engaged art. You mentioned that earlier about that you're doing, I think you said you're doing more socially engaged art shows. Expand on that, please, for me. I'm not, that's a new phrase for me.
So we did a show last year that was one of the artists who was in my original Cutter show, an artist named Casey Blumen. And she works with cut paper collages. And she's done a series of works. She's interested in exploring the meaning of place. So she did a series of works that were small cut paper collages illustrating places in New Jersey that were either safe houses, former safe houses on the Underground Railroad, or places where race riots broke out during the Civil Rights era. And these illustrate, they're very quiet, little nondescript places. They're as they are today. So the work really explored the idea of, how do we remember things from our past? How is place associated with the history of a people and a place? And so when we did that show, we took it as we used it as an opportunity to have some broader discussions about issues of race, especially in New Jersey. So we, for instance, had a documentary film by a series of filmmakers, filmmakers who had made a series of documentaries about the Newark riots, and we did a Q&A with that. We had a professor come and talk about slave narratives. We did a workshop with some people about oral history and collecting stories. So I think of the artwork aesthetically, they're really beautiful collages that could live on their own with no meaning. But I think there was an opportunity to address issues that are in society at large, not specifically art. Using art as a bridge to talk about things like race and policing. And I've been thinking a lot about the issue of mass incarceration. I just closed a show. I worked with an artist from Providence, Rhode Island, who was making a series of quilts that were based on aerial views of maximum security prisons. And they look like pieced quilts because prisons are very often built around the same principle of blocks that are repeated. And this artist has really been exploring this idea and also looking into ideas about domesticity and home and safety and surveillance. And it really brought up a lot of interesting things. So it was this great exhibition of quilts, but it really had this other element, and it kind of made me hungry to do more along those lines. And, at some point in the future.
Hold on, Richard, I muted you. Let me unmute you if you wish to respond.
Yeah, I like the idea of being a bridge to bring up conversation about things that are really socially on the question line. And I guess I keep looking for ways that how my art may do that. And it's a good way for me to look at my art a little differently and see what it can do. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Cool.
I think in general, something in terms of my own personal taste, I love art that is interesting to look at on some level, so that if a 5-year-old kid looked at it, or an 85-year-old woman, everyone would come away with something. But then if you're able to look beyond and see what the underpinnings and the more objective meaning of the art is, what are the underlying concepts, I think that then it becomes more engaging and enriching. But it has to stand alone for me on aesthetics. It has to start with that. It could be interesting. It's what I said before. I'm not that interested in art that's strictly conceptual. If it's a bunch of receipts, I think that can be really interesting, but it has to be aesthetically pleasing to me as a starting point. So my favorite kind of art is art that makes me want to look at it some more, and then it makes me want to think about it some more when I walk away from it. Mm-hmm.
I think the there are different priorities over time, or there's different things in the history of art that society prioritizes at a given moment. And I think what's being prioritized for a while has been expanding one's horizons. And socially engaged art, I think, is asking one to look at other people who should be your peers and might not be, because you guys just don't know enough about each other. So why don't we create some level of comfort that each of you have and bring you into a situation where you're sufficiently comfortable, and then provide you with some stimuli that's almost comfortable, like the other person's food, and then let's talk about it. And I think you'll see more of that kind of stuff happen, where there's an activity or an interchange, but not a product, like a painting, that gets judged, or that exists. It's the experience you carry forward, not your relationship with the item.
And I also think contemporary art calls on the viewer to a great extent to complete the work on so many levels. And I think that there are a lot of artists who are now taking that to the next level, where the activity, not just of looking, but some kind of interaction with the work, gives it an additional meaning. I just met a young artist a couple of weeks ago who fascinated me. He's from Haiti, and he emigrated to the Bahamas and grew up in the Bahamas. So he's really interested in this idea of migrating, and he's in the United States now, and he's was trained in ceramics. So he did this project where he asked people to bring teacups. So he made these kind of, no frills cups out of clay. And then he invited people to come in and to bring a teacup in and share a cup of tea with him. And then they exchanged cups. So he ended up with all of the teacups that he collected, and he sent his artwork out into the world. And I loved that. And I thought, I have never done anything like that, but that's on my bucket list very soon.
That's a great way to get rid of all your old teacups. That's brilliant. Giacomo, hold on, let me unmute you. Wait a minute. Why aren't you now here? I'll go over here. Go ahead.
Hi. I think that the answer already happened, but it was exactly like about social engagement, and I would say another curator I really like it, or critic I really like, is Nicolas Bourdieu, Aesthetics Relations, where I mean the product doesn't exist anymore, or probably existed by aesthetics with a relation with participation, which mean I don't know, for example, Tira Vanija is cooking in a museum, and so as kind of art make it, probably without aesthetics. But I think that the answer already happens. I mean, the question was what's related with aesthetics, relation and aesthetics, like about products.
Wow. Mary, did you follow that? What's the relationship of the absence of aesthetics and/or aesthetics?
Well,
with the absence of a product or something physical that exists, sort of, kind of.
Again, I can't really define or talk about relational aesthetics on a theoretical level. However, I would say that any experience, that there are aesthetics around it, and that I think that if, for instance, the cooking in a gallery, I think there's a difference I hope there's a difference when an artist comes into a gallery and cooks and has an exchange with the public. I have to believe that that's different than hiring a chef to come in and do it. Now, maybe there isn't. Maybe in fact I'm being naive, or romantic, but I like to think that there's going to be some kind of, for lack of a better word, aesthetics in the experience, that there's going to be something artful in how the artist is doing that, making that exchange with the public, and that the interaction, would we all agree that the interaction is the performative aspect of it, is the art, but it's not only the person doing the cooking, it's the person doing the eating as well. And I like to think that an artist would bring something, special to that. Again, I don't know a lot about it, but I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, and at some point, yes, and it's kind of some kind of these currents of art, and I think like about Tanya Bruguera, for example, about Tina Segal, for example, about Ravanija, Peruge, or all kind of these artists. I love it, and my background is about a little bit this, and I was interested about the profit gallery and curator or institution can be like interesting this kind of artist, and why on this kind of artist. What is the motivation? A curator want to engage with some kind of this artist.
Yeah, I certainly know, like in the case of Tanya Bruguera, I think there's, with her at least, an obvious political connection with her, being a Cuban artist. And I wonder if that is part of what charges this up, that there is some kind of socio-political motivation behind many of these artists and this art making.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think that's true with Tanya. I don't know that's true across the board. Valerie, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi there. Wait, you just muted yourself, or somebody did. Wait. Have you unmuted? Go ahead now. Yeah, you did.
Okay. All right. So I'm working on a proposal for it's a call for proposal for a group show. It's through the city of Santa Monica, and I've never actually curated a show besides my own solo show, and I have an idea, and I'm trying to think in a new way as a curator, and how to make something that will draw in an audience and think in different terms. So right now, there are like 4 artists that I'm thinking about, including myself, who have previously worked in, let's say, traditional media, and we've been in some shows of digital art. So we're sort of in both traditional and new media, and I'm just trying to write up and think about a way to propose this or make sense of it, and I'm just wondering, any advice to how to clarify an idea or have something that will bring people in.
I'm a big fan of direct talk.
I can't hear.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Nah, but again, your volume's been going up and down a bit. I think it's the software tonight. Mary, just keep going, and I'll fill in if I can.
Okay. I think direct talk is the best, to be clear about your idea. I think that from my own viewpoint, I can tell you that what drives me and motivates me as a curator is I'm trying to create a new context for art, because artists can make art in their studio and it can be really meaningful. But sometimes, especially with group shows, when you bring that art out of the studio and into the gallery, and you place it in context with another work by another artist, it sparks a conversation between the works that you can't have alone. So when I think advice about a proposal is letting people know what is this new context that you're creating for the art, and what are some of the conversation starters that you hope to achieve by this. Not really using that language, but saying that I'm going to be looking at how these three artists use color, and by putting them together, it will be revealing things in each of their arts that you wouldn't see necessarily alone. Those are the kinds of things I think that make for a cohesive proposal, and also to really, the person reading it and looking at the images should really be able to envision what the show kind of will look like. So often I see people write things and it's full of theoretical gobbledygook, and I think that it's really important to just speak directly and clearly.
I agree. Hold on, Valerie. It got better when I muted you. So you are unmuted if you want to ask some more, follow up.
No, this is helpful to get a direction and to think about, from the point of view of who's reading it, and it's very helpful because thinking like a curator is a different process, and I'm excited about it. I think I can do it as well as be an artist, and thank you.
Valerie, thank you too. Let me ask Mary a question. Mary, one of the things Valerie said that's a red flag to me.
I know what you're going to say.
And what's your opinion?
About putting yourself in the show?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of it, to be perfectly honest with you. I think here's the reason why I think you have to be careful. When you curate a show, you're looking, a group show, you're looking for some theme or aspect that unites all of the artists. And I think that obviously you're going to be exploring something that is meaningful in your own practice. And there's always a danger that it will look like I put together a show around this idea of geometric abstraction because that's what I do, and I need to find a new context for my work. I think that you make yourself a little bit vulnerable to making it look like I'm doing a show around my work, and I'm looking for my friends or colleagues who make work that will complement my work. I think that I also understand that there are not enough opportunities to show your work, and you have to find ways to show your own work. But I think if you're curating a group show around a theme, I think you have more credibility if you're not in the show. That's my, what do you call? I'm curious.
No, I totally agree. I also think one can have pop-up exhibits where all the participants are equals and nobody's taking any claim for curation. I think that you can be both roles, artist and curator, but I don't think you are both at once. It's sort of like you're greedy or opportunistic and you tisk, and people, you end up shorter than if you had just pretended to be humble.
Like I say, I understand it, but I admire artists who curate. I think artists bring a completely different vision to curating shows, and I
agree
to do that. And I also think that if you put together a show and you put 5 artists in it, now you have 5 people who owe you. And when they do a show, they will be looking at your work, and there'll be I think it just will continue to mushroom and snowball, and you will get benefit from it, even if you don't put yourself in the show.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Hey, I don't see anybody else with questions. First person to raise their hand can, talk. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to ask my own question.
Frederica Foster. Do I see?
Frederica, a second. We can go the other route. Somebody, I see Mocha, and Frederica's cleaning her windshield. Okay, cool, Frederica, go ahead. You know, down below, wait a minute. So, all right, Frederica, go ahead, but I got to figure something out. Go ahead, you got the floor.
Thank you. I curated an exhibition at the Cathedral St. John the Divine on Water in 2011-12. And when they asked me to do it, and they asked me to be in the show, I said, no, it's impossible. You don't understand. The artist cannot be in the show. And they said, well, if you want to do this show, we want you to put a painting in. And because it's a nonprofit organization and nothing is for sale, this has been done many times in Europe. You know, they came with me for a list that it was okay, but we did not get a review for that show. And I suspect, well, we did, but I mean, the Times didn't give us a review, despite the fact that many people called them up and said, you should come and see this show. I got tremendous support from New York artists because they love the cathedral, and artists from all over the country and the world. So I think it hurt us. I think the fact that I was in that show really hurt us. I totally agree with you. But I got so much out of it. I didn't need to be in it at all. I got so much myself as a curator. It was a great gift to me. Thank you.
No, but if it's any consolation, the New York Times is reviewing, what, 5 shows a week? How many shows are in New York? So I wouldn't beat myself up about it. They probably don't examine things that closely to say, oh, we can't do that because the artist is in it. If that's any consolation, and
It is.
You know, it doesn't sound like you really had a choice, and it was a great experience. And you'll do more, and you won't put yourself in it.
Thank you.
You know, but that brings up a different point, and that is that I think we are all humans are really prone to denigrating ourselves. And if something is wrong, we assume we are the ones who are at fault, or we did something wrong. And frequently, that's not the case. You know, I coach a fair number of TED Fellows, and I've mentioned this to you guys before, and I still see that they are insecure. And my sense is that all of us need to ratchet our self-opinion up 15%. And then we can buffer some of that when we look in the mirror and we tell ourselves the lie that we're not as cool as everybody says we are. You know, the stuff people say to you is probably true. It's probably truer than the stuff you say to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the negative stuff people say to you, that's about them. You know, think about it. Try and get objective for a minute and notice. Notice that when somebody pays you a compliment, that couldn't be true. You know, it probably is. They don't have those BS filters that you have when you look at you, and then when I look at me, you know, they're probably right on. Frederica, I bet it was a great show.
It was fantastic. There were 40 artists, and we filled the entire cathedral, all the chapels. It was astonishing.
Way to go. See, you got the floor. Go ahead.
Hi, Mary. My question is a little bit twofold. What are your thoughts about video and installation at the Visual Arts Center?
Should we stop there? Or do you want to bring up the other one now? Go ahead. Your choice.
Oh, okay. And the other was that it looks like the center is a lot about community engagement. And if you were open to video and installation, would you be open to an artist bringing a program, a community education program along with that?
I didn't hear the end of the question. Would you be interested in what kind of a program?
Oh, sort of an educational component to an exhibition or a proposal.
Did you say meditational?
No, educational.
Educational.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question. It's not something that has come up because we have a department that does that, but that would, yeah, I mean, well, I should, let me correct myself. So I'm working with an artist next spring who practice incorporates walking in public landscapes. So the exhibition will have a component that will have a lot of outreach, and he's going to be designing walks in some of the national parks in New Jersey, and there'll be an interactive. So he's the artist is kind of coming with this community engagement piece. So, you know, and that just might be a personal bias. We at the Art Center, we like things like that. I have a project space, and I've worked with a lot of installation artists. I'm only going to have that space for 1 more year, and then we're repurposing it for something else. But I have done I love installation work. It's the scariest thing for a curator because you can't curate it. You collaborate with the artist, but and hopefully can be a guide for the artist, but you really can't control what's going in the gallery. So it's a scary thing, but I happen to love installation, and I have worked with a lot of installation artists. Video, I've had video components in shows. I did one show once that was an audio experience. It was a sound artist, and I have done one show that was all video. It's more a physical space problem, that our main gallery space has daylight, where there are 2 beautiful windows in the gallery, so it's very hard to do a big video show. We don't have the capability of, you know, closing those windows off yet. So I like video. I'm probably not a connoisseur. I'm really picky about it, but I do like video. But so I'm open to it, and I love installation. It's one of my favorite things.
Cool. See, do you want to say more?
Maybe do you see it seems like as the concept of art and just taking in art is expanding and changing and growing, do you see installation as something as an area that's growing?
I don't know, because I can only answer from my own perspective, but something that I've become more interested in, for instance, that might be along these lines, is the idea of artist residencies. And I'm thinking about the possibility of having short-term residencies in gallery spaces where the artist would come in and use it as a studio, basically, where there would be times for the public to come in and interact with the artists. And very often those kinds of experiences lend themselves to installation. And I think it's growing. I don't know, you know, when you're attracted to something, you always notice that. I love photography, but again, because of the limitations of my gallery space, I've never done a complete show of photography. I really love photography, but it just hasn't happened yet. Or I shouldn't say that I've done small shows, but no big show.
Cool. Thank you. Giacomo, did you have another question? Go ahead.
Yes. About very curiously, when curator have like a concept, contest, a messages to leave, but so I think probably it's something happened about artist and audience. So how much you think on the artist and artwork side, how much you think about audience, how these 2 things match in your curator?
How much do I think about the audience and how the audience and the artist match up?
Yes.
I don't think it's a motivational thing. I don't think I think, oh, I need to pick this artist because there'll be an audience for that particular artist. But I'm always looking for ways to connect an artist to an audience. We try to have artists who are showing come and have a day with the kids, these high school kids who come to the art center. This is an ongoing relationship throughout the year. So that's one way where I might think, oh, you know, this particular artist would be a really good match for an educational component. or this particular person might really do a great community-based workshop. Or something else we've done is we've looked at artists in our current show and chosen an artist to lead a series of teachers symposia that we're teachers from the state of New Jersey who need professional development credits will come in and take a symposium, and they'll get credit for it. So we'll try to choose an artist who's one of the current exhibiting artists, just to make it a little bit more dynamic. So I think in that way, and I will say I probably am motivated somewhat by the idea, oh, if I work with this artist, it's going to give us a lot of opportunities to relate to this particular audience. But the challenge is always to find ways to connect the audience with the art and the artist.
Cool. Does anybody else have a question? Wait a minute. I saw one. Heather, I've been waiting all night for you. It took you this long to come up with a question? Go for it, girl.
Well, I've just been listening.
Okay.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. Wait.
Thanks for being...
Heather Lewis.
Yeah, I showed in your Studio X in 2011. So, hey.
Oh my God, I just looked you up the other day.
Oh, fantastic.
Weird. And I said, where is she? You showed in you were the first artist.
In your lovely studio.
Yes,
yeah.
Project space. I invited Heather because I knew her work, and I thought
it was good.
So, see you again.
Good to see you too. I really enjoyed showing in your space. It was wonderful to put it on there. I had a great week painting a mural outside and everything. I hope they got the paint off there eventually, your guys who did the painting.
Absolutely. Many since then.
Okay. I guess I had a question because we've been talking about, gallery representation and stuff. For various reasons, I had to take a step back the last 4 or 5 years, taking care of my mom, which was a fantastic experience, and I'm just kind of emerging again. But I realized that I'd done many shows in nonprofit galleries in a span of about 5 years, and I was talking with Paul about how to kind of break out of that, just because nonprofit is difficult to sustain. And I realized that the show I put on in the Studio X didn't really have many saleable things in it. So what's your comment about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge in being an installation artist is that, how do you sell it? There are people who can sell installations, but they're not at my pay grade, at my level. I think that
right.
Who makes installations, and I'm assuming that you're still making installations as well as objects, is that correct?
I'm kind of just coming back to the studio and have ideas of many things, but what I'm realizing is that I didn't make a lot of, I tried to make the installation. I didn't value anything leading up to the installation, any kind of thought pictures or work towards that, which might have been useful.
I remember you did have individual drawings though, that were framed, and some of those cut pieces could be framed. I think you have to be true to who you are, but you do have to think of ways that you can disseminate your work. If you make installation work and people write about it and it gets a lot of attention, that's one way. But you do have to be able to sell things. I think that if you have, for instance, we did a brochure for your show, and I can send you some more of those. If you use a piece like that to send them to a gallery, and then you send them some images of. I also make work that subtext. You can take to art fairs and you can hang on the wall, and they're very saleable.
Okay.
That you have to kind of use what you have to get people interested. And it's a really interesting question. at what point do you devote yourself to making things that you can sell, and still be true to who you are as an artist? I mean, I think it has to be a consideration. Just like I have to consider, oh, you know, how would this look in a gallery, you know, in a show? You have to look at it. It's not easy.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Thanks for commenting. Appreciate it.
I'd love to get back in touch with you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Cool, that was sweet. Thanks, gang. Jane, go ahead.
Yes. This goes to Paul's webinars generally. He's put together a series by women about women in art to address the problems, as he's said himself, about the fact that a lot of men have probably messed things up in the last century, and women haven't had too much of a look in. And so far in the webinars, I wasn't there last week, but we've had these fabulous women that don't seem to have had any problems at all. A, have you had any? B, how would you address that? Would you address it in a show? Or is it still perhaps this really sticky, difficult thing to address because it would come across as aggressive, or like in the 60s?
I don't think, I may be naive, I don't feel that I've personally been deprived of anything because I'm a woman, but I don't have much to compare it to. You know, it's difficult. I've never felt that being a woman has held me back, but I also started late. I was already a grown-up when I started, so that's a hard question. What's more of something that I wrestle with is how can you address it in a meaningful way in organizing exhibitions without ghettoizing women. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I did an all-female show. And what motivated me to do it was I found an old catalog from a show that was from 1973 called Women Choose Women. And I thought, what an interest, I'd never heard of it. And so I looked in the catalog, and it was the first show organized by a first museum show in New York City, organized entirely by women, and all of the participants were women in it. And it was held in 1973. And there were over 100 women in it. And many of them were still alive, but most of the women who participated. I realized we were coming up on the 40th anniversary of this show. And I thought, oh, I'd love to get in touch with some of these women and invite them to show current work. So I contacted 13 of the original artists and invited them to be in a show where we would show their work, and then I asked each of them to bring along another woman that they wanted to choose. And it was really interesting. I was expecting to have a lot of pushback because I feel like maybe some women don't want to be ghettoized. I don't want to be in a show that's about women artists. I just did a show of African-American artists, and I had a little bit of, oh, I don't like to be called an African-American artist. I think sometimes it's like we have to take our medicine. We have to have these shows because I felt it was an important thing to look back on this iconic feminist show and to perhaps ask the question, how much has changed, if anything? And interestingly enough, the women who were, as I said, all in their 70s and 80s, for the most part, chose their peers. I was expecting them to choose young women, and they all chose their friends and peers, which was really a lovely thing. So it really became about female networking for me. And it enabled us through our programming to look at some of these issues and to talk about art from a feminist standpoint. But you are like opening yourself up to critique and vulnerability when you have these, like a show of all female artists. So it's something that I thought about, but it was just an idea that I loved, and it was really a lovely show with a lot of great people in it, and it was a great experience. And interestingly enough, I'm really really big on networking and the community of art. I just think it's so important. One of the artists in the show was Joyce Kozloff. And when I contacted her, I was a little nervous. I thought, oh, is she going to want to be in the show? And she got back to me right away, and she said, I'd love to be in the show. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I know exactly who I'm going to choose. My college roommate, when we went to college together, when we moved to New York, we shared our first apartment together, and she's a wonderful artist who hasn't really pursued her career that much. And Joyce was right. I fell madly in love with this woman. She was in that show, and she just had a solo show with me last season because I liked her so much. I thought I have to have a whole show of this woman. So it's kind of the Pollyanna version, but I like the idea that when you're open and generous and you try to be inclusive, sometimes good things come out of it. So I've kind of rambled. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's a conundrum, the whole idea of feminism in art, I think.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Mary. I think, there's two other things that you said there that I'm going to forget. One, it's about the relationships, you know what I mean? I think so often opportunities grow from relationships, and that it is not sufficient just to make good art, that Mary isn't going to find it if Joyce doesn't tell Mary, or if, what's this artist's name?
Judith Henry.
So if Judith Henry doesn't submit, get in touch with Mary. It doesn't happen. It's about the relationships and doing that. The other thing that I thought was cute was that you felt some insecurity about getting in touch with Joyce Kozloff, and directly parallels the insecurities that artists would feel getting in touch with you. And just like Joyce got in touch back with you in moments, you might, or you are equally, people in the art world are accessible. You want to see other artists succeed. You may not be the one to enable it, but you're not interested in getting in their way. And you are there to see if, do what you can, if you can. And I think that artists, we all need to remind ourselves that there's an awful lot of people out there who are actually interested in seeing us get traction and move along, and certainly are not interested. They're not a gatekeeper. They're not in the way. They're not asking us to pay a toll before we can proceed. It's sort of like, yeah, maybe you need to go to school, or maybe you need to, oh, no, you're ready. Let me introduce you to Leo. It's like, you find out by doing it. Go ahead, Mary.
No, I was going to say, I think you're right. It's not universal. I do think, personally, I like to work with people who make themselves accessible. I have approached artists and galleries who wouldn't give me the time of day. It's not okay, but it's not the end of the world for me. I move on to the next person. And I
exactly.
think, there are so many accessible people. I will tell all of you the same thing I always tell artists. You just kind of have to need to know how to approach someone. People just the same way gallerists say, oh, don't walk into the gallery and hand me your slides. I invite artists to contact me. I read all of my email. I look at everything people send me. I cannot respond, but I definitely look, and curators talk to each other, and I make notes of things, and sometimes I actually do get back to people and say, hey, let's do a studio visit. So, and there are a lot of people like me who are happy to look at new work. I think something I've shared with you, Paul, and other people as well, is that for a contemporary curator, someone who's working with contemporary artists as opposed to dead artists, you are providing the material that I need to do my job. I cannot do my job without relationships with artists, because I need that raw material. You go into your studio and make work, and whether I put it in a show or not, you're still making work. My work is only relevant when I have stuff to work with. I'm not making it myself. So, I don't think you need to get cocky about it, but maybe you need to get cocky about it, or feel empowered by that. That the truth is, contemporary curators
need artists. So you just have to hope that they need you at a particular moment.
Awesome. And on that, we are going to stop. And I am unmuting everybody so that we can all tell Mary how awesome she is. Mary, thank you a ton.
Thanks,
for
Mary.
your contribution.
Thank you, Mary.
All the knowledge.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. I'm stopping the recording.